Hello. I'm the son they left out of every photo. The one they locked in a dog kennel for disrespecting my father, a man who ruled us with fists and silence. At his funeral, no one stood to speak, so I did. I gave a beautiful eulogy, all lies. And when it ended, the lawyer leaned in and whispered, "Congratulations. You just passed his final test." That's when everything unraveled. Why would a father torment his own son yet and then leave him everything? And what did my brother do next that nearly destroyed us all? The funeral home smelled like furniture polish and dried flowers, something artificial trying to cover rot. I'd been here almost an hour, and no one had said a word to me. Just side glances, occasional throat clearing, and a lot of looking anywhere but toward the casket. The director stood at the front, glancing between us and the printed program in his hand. We now open the floor, if anyone would like to say a few words. No one moved. Not a sound except the faint hum of the overhead lights and the distant shuffle of heels from another room. My siblings sat like wax figures, Silas with his arms folded, jaw clenched. Marlene tapping her phone under the program like no one could see. My uncles looked down into their laps like they were praying, though I knew they weren't the praying type. I looked around and realized what this was, a test. Even in death, Elias Vennet was testing us. Of course, no one would get up. Who would dare eulogize a man who ruled our home like a warden, who demanded loyalty and offered fear in return? My hands itched, not from nerves but from memory. It hit me so suddenly I could smell it. Rusty metal, urine-soaked straw, dog food in a chipped bowl. I was 8, maybe 9. My punishment for tracking dirt across the kitchen floor after baseball practice. Eat there, sleep there. Maybe then you'll learn respect. That's what he said. He made me crawl into the kennel we used for the family's German Shepherd. My plate slid in beside me like I was the animal. I could barely see through the slats, but I remember Marlene glancing my way, then pretending she hadn't. Silas didn't even look up from his homework. I spent the night in there, cold, silent, afraid to cry because I knew he was waiting for it. Even now, decades later, I felt the phantom ache of curled up limbs. The shame burrowed under my skin like a tick. I should have walked out. No one expected me to be here. I'd moved across the state, kept my distance for a reason. But my mother begged me, said she didn't want it to be just a box and no words. And now here we were. The director cleared his throat again, his voice slightly thinner this time. If anyone would like to speak. The silence thickened. People began whispering. Church women in big hats leaned toward each other, mouthing things like, "Isn't that his oldest son?" Or "What a shame." My throat tightened. I could feel my siblings watching the air, carefully pretending to be elsewhere. I felt 17 again, forgotten, extra, like background noise. And yet, something shifted. Maybe it was the judgment in those whispers, or the way Mom looked like she wanted to vanish into the pew. Or maybe it was just the sudden heat of being tired. Tired of being silent, of pretending this man hadn't shaped us all with a cruel hand. I stood, not fully realizing it, not even really agreeing to it. My knees moved, and then the rest of me followed. A creak of the wooden floor beneath my shoes broke the spell in the room. "I'll do it," I said. Every head turned. I saw the way Silas blinked like he'd been slapped. Marlene froze mid-scroll. One of the aunts gasped. I walked slowly, past the rows of people I hadn't seen in years, their eyes wide with some mix of pity and disbelief. So many of them had known about the punishments, the outbursts, the quiet bruises left on more than just skin, and they had chosen, over and over, to say nothing. I reached the podium. The mic stood there, lifeless and expectant. I stared down at the black mesh cover of it, feeling the familiar tightness in my chest. My hand hovered just above it, fingers curling. And just like that, I was back inside the kennel. The funeral home disappeared. I was a boy again, small, trapped, humiliated. My heart thudded in my ears. My fingers tingled, my mouth was dry. But this time, I wasn't crawling. This time, I wasn't obeying. I closed my fingers around the mic. I took the microphone, but the truth was, my mind was completely blank. My fingers tightened around the base, slick with nervous sweat. I looked out over the sea of faces, some familiar, others distant in more ways than one. Their expressions were unreadable, waiting, expecting, maybe hoping I'd choke. I swallowed hard and smiled, just enough to hide the tension in my jaw. I had nothing written. No notes, no prepared words, just a lifetime of silence sitting behind my ribs like a coiled spring. I want to thank you all for being here today, I began, my voice more steady than I felt. My father was a man of discipline. Pause. A few heads tilted. I continued before anyone could read too much into that. He believed in structure, in holding us to a standard. He taught us that strength wasn't about fear, but about love. I felt that one catch in my throat, but I pushed through it. In his own way, he was always there. Even when he didn't say much, we knew he cared. Marlene shifted uncomfortably. Silas glanced down at his lap. My mother stared straight ahead, her hands folded so tightly her knuckles had gone white. I didn't know where the words were coming from. They weren't mine, not really. It was like I was channeling some alternate version of our life, a version people could applaud. One where the bruises were metaphors, the yelling was just tough love, the punishments lessons we misunderstood as kids. I painted a picture of a stern but loving father, one who stayed up late to help with homework, who drove us to practice, who showed affection in silence because he didn't know how else to love. Every word was a betrayal, not of him, of myself. I looked down at the polished wood of the podium and remembered Thanksgiving years ago. I was 20, home from college, proud of a short story I'd published in the university lit mag. Mom passed it around. People smiled politely. But Dad, he stood and said, "This is what we're sending you to school for. Fairy tales? How does that feed a family, son?" I remembered the way everyone laughed, awkward, uneasy. But no one stood up for me. No one said it was cruel. Now, I looked back up and said, he always made us feel valued. A couple of women near the front dabbed their eyes with tissues. An older man nodded, smiling. Maybe he saw himself in Dad. Maybe he needed to believe that kind of man could still be loved. The more I spoke, the more they leaned in. Their expressions softened. My mother's eyes shimmered. Marlene blinked hard. Even Silas, who never missed a chance to look angry, was just staring. I kept going. Not because I believed it, but because I realized something terrifying. They wanted this story. They needed it. The congregation wasn't here for truth. They were here for comfort. And for the first time in my life, I held that power. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't the kid in the kennel anymore. I was the one shaping the memory. I was the voice. I wrapped up with a few lines about forgiveness and legacy, words that tasted like cardboard in my mouth. I couldn't believe I was saying them, but I knew they'd play well. That's what funerals are, performance. I glanced at my family one last time before stepping away. Silas glared like I'd just lit our childhood on fire. Marlene had her lips pressed tight, biting back something, grief or rage, I couldn't tell. And my mother, her face didn't move, not a single twitch. That scared me most. As I walked back to my seat, applause broke out. Polite, restrained, but real. People patted my shoulder. Someone whispered, "Beautifully said." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Inside, everything was shaking. I had just lied to an entire room, lied to my family, lied to myself. But for the first time, I felt something I never had in that house growing up. Control. Had I just betrayed myself? Or had I finally broken free? I left the podium to polite applause, but my hands were trembling with a secret no one else could hear. Back at my seat, I nodded along with the handshakes and hushed "good job" comments like someone playing a role too long. The lie I'd told still echoed in my chest like I hadn't taken a full breath since I spoke it. After the service, I stayed just long enough to avoid questions, then slipped away without fanfare. By the time I got home, the sky had gone from ash gray to pitch. Houston was quiet, at least in my part of town. But the silence in my house felt sharper than usual, like it could cut skin if I breathed wrong. I dropped my keys on the kitchen counter and stood there for a while, unsure whether to sit or pace or scream into a pillow. Eventually, I ended up lying on my back in bed, staring at the ceiling fan circling slow above me. It wasn't moving fast enough to blur the memory of their applause. Of the way they smiled, nodded, leaned into that story as if it healed something in them. They applauded the man who caged me. That phrase wouldn't leave my head. Not when I turned off the lights. Not when I shut my eyes. I kept hearing it over and over, like a whisper stuck between my ears. I hadn't told them about the kennel. How could I? That memory lived in the marrow of me, deeper than I'd ever dared to dig before. I was 10, maybe 11. I don't remember the exact year, just the feeling. We were at dinner. Dad had grilled steak, which meant we had to earn the meat. That was his phrase, like we were a pack of dogs instead of his children. He asked Corbin something, one of those rigged questions where no matter what you answered, you'd be wrong. Corbin stayed quiet, wise enough to dodge it. Me? I spoke. I said something about how maybe we didn't need to earn food. That maybe food was just food. The fork slipped from his hand like it had been waiting for an excuse to fall. He didn't yell. He didn't even stand. He looked at me with that ice-cold expression and said, "If you think you're free to disrespect my table, you don't need to eat at it." Next thing I knew, I was outside, in the backyard, sitting on the cold floor of the old dog kennel we'd stopped using years ago. The bowl he handed me had half a chicken thigh and dry rice in it, already cold. Corbin walked past, smirking, not in cruelty, but that kind of pleased detachment that says, "Better you than me." I hated him for that. I remember looking up at the house through the wired mesh. The dining room window was lit, and behind it I could see my mother standing still, just watching. No phone call, no shout, nothing. She looked away before I did. That night, something inside me cracked. I tried to speak up, and it got me locked away like a stray. After that, I didn't speak much. At school, at home, silence became safer. Lying in bed now, that coldness crawled up my back all over again. I rolled over, stared at the digital clock blinking 1:14 a.m., and sat up. I couldn't sleep. I didn't want to. My living room light was still on, a soft amber hue glowing from the lamp beside my bookshelf. I walked in and sat on the edge of the couch, knees bouncing with nervous energy I couldn't contain. Why did I lie? Why had I stood up there and fed them a version of a man they never really knew? Was it for them, or was it for me? Maybe it wasn't about giving him a legacy. Maybe it was about giving myself a voice, even if the words weren't real. For once, they'd listened. They'd looked at me, not past me. That thought should have brought comfort. Instead, it made my stomach knot. Because if that's what it took, rewriting truth into fiction, what else had been twisted? There were things I hadn't thought about in years. Whispers behind doors. Sidelong glances between Corbin and Dad. Bits of conversation I'd overheard when I was supposed to be asleep. One in particular came back in perfect clarity. I was maybe 14. Upstairs, lying in bed, Dad and Corbin were downstairs in his study. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, I just couldn't sleep. I remember Corbin's voice, low but sure. "Don't worry, Lazaro doesn't matter. He'll never fight back." I thought I'd imagined it, that I was half asleep, but now I wasn't so sure. What if it was always like that? What if the entire family decided I was the quiet one, the expendable one? The son who wouldn't make noise even when shoved into a cage? What if my invisibility wasn't just a side effect? It was a plan. The doorbell rang. It was soft, not urgent, but that sound at that hour cut through my thoughts like a slap. I stood, heart already pounding. I wasn't expecting anyone. I hadn't spoken to anyone since the funeral. I glanced at the clock. 1:43 a.m. Cautiously, I approached the front door and peeked through the peephole. A man stood there, tall, lean, coat buttoned all the way to his chin despite the warm night. In his hand, something white, a letter. No, an envelope. I cracked the door open. "Aldous?" I asked, recognizing the Venet family lawyer immediately. He smiled like someone who'd just solved a puzzle no one else knew existed. "Evening, Lazaro," he said smoothly. "I'm sorry to show up this late, but I thought you might want to see this sooner rather than later." He held up the envelope. My name was written in block letters across the front. "I assume you recognize your father's handwriting." I didn't reach for it. Not yet. I couldn't. "What is it?" I asked, my voice low, wary. "A letter," he replied, stepping closer. "Left specifically for you. Sealed the day he revised the will. There are certain details that need your attention." My fingers finally took the envelope, but I didn't open it. Not yet. Aldous' smile widened just enough to make me uneasy. "Mind if I come in?" he asked, already stepping past the threshold. And Aldous stepped into my living room, carrying a sealed envelope with my name on it. He walked past me like he owned the place, calm, deliberate, pausing only to glance at the rain streaking down the windowpane as if it amused him. He placed the envelope on my coffee table with both hands as though it were something sacred. I stood still by the door, my fingers tightening around the doorknob, unsure whether I wanted to throw him out or sit and listen. "You're not going to open it?" he asked, settling into my armchair like we had done this a dozen times before. "What the hell is this?" I said, not loud but sharp. He steepled his fingers. "Your father's final instructions. He left one for each child, but yours was special." I sat down slowly, the envelope still untouched between us. My name on the front, Lazaro, was written in Elias's unmistakable hand, all block letters, all power. Aldous studied me, his voice cool. "He knew you'd be the last to receive yours." "The final piece." "The final piece of what?" I asked. A faint smile pulled at the corners of his mouth. "A test. Or rather, the end of one." I leaned back, heart pounding. "You're saying the funeral was a test?" "Every moment of your childhood was," he said. "Your father curated your experiences." "That's a fancy way of saying he tortured us." Aldous didn't flinch. He believed control revealed character. You, Lazaro, were his most uncertain variable. So he watched, he pushed, and in the end, he gave you the stage. I shook my head, the nausea rising again. "So he knew what I'd say?" "He suspected," Aldous said, folding one leg over the other. "You were the only one who chose compassion over condemnation. That mattered to him." I laughed once, bitter and small. "You're saying the lie I told earned me a gold star?" "No. It earned you this." He tapped the envelope. I stared at it, pulse hammering behind my eyes. "He did this on purpose." "All of it?" Aldous tilted his head. "I'm afraid so. Even your punishments were orchestrated. Your exile from the dinner table, your time in the kennel, all observed, measured." My breath caught. That damn kennel again. I remembered the look on Corbin's face, the smug relief, the silence from Mom's window. And now, I was supposed to believe it had all been part of some master plan. "I was a child," I muttered. "You were his child," Aldous corrected gently. "And Elias didn't raise children. He built legacies." I stood up abruptly, needing to move, to pace. "He made me a ghost. That's what he built." "No," Aldous said, voice low. "He made you a witness, one he couldn't control in the end. That's why your voice mattered." My hands were trembling. I turned away, not wanting him to see. "I remember once," I said quietly. "I had a choice." Corbin had stolen money from Dad's wallet. I knew it. I saw it. Dad brought us into the room, stood us in a line like soldiers. He asked who did it. Corbin looked me in the eye, daring me. I stayed quiet. "What happened?" "I got punished anyway," I said. "Dad told me silence was complicity, and Corbin got off clean." Aldous nodded. "That was another test, and he remembered." I laughed again, louder this time, nearly unhinged. "So what's this?" I asked, gesturing to the envelope. "Another trap? A riddle from beyond the grave?" He didn't answer. just watched me. Let me guess, I said. Corbin already knows what's in his. Aldous didn't smile. Corbin thinks he's already won. My jaw tightened. Hasn't he? That depends on what you do next. I turned toward him slowly. You think I'm going to play this game? That I want anything from that man? Aldous leaned forward now, eyes glinting. He didn't leave you money, Lazaro. He left you leverage, a weapon, and he trusted only you to hold it. I sat back down, exhausted. You keep saying that like it's a gift. It feels more like a curse, he nodded. Maybe, but curses can be powerful. In the right hands. I stared at the envelope. My name seemed to glow in the dim light, like it wanted something from me. Why me? I whispered. Aldous paused. Because you didn't fight for dominance. You fought for survival. That's rarer than strength. I didn't respond. Couldn't. He rose to leave, buttoning his coat slowly. Corbin's making moves, quiet ones. He thinks you'll stay in the shadows, like always. Then maybe he's right. Aldous opened the door but looked back once more. Or maybe it's time the ghost finally haunted the living. And just like that, he was gone. The envelope sat on my table, untouched. The rain outside had grown heavier, and somewhere inside me something shifted. The envelope had sat untouched on my coffee table all night, its presence heavy as the silence that had returned once Aldous left. I hadn't slept. Not really. I lay on the couch fully dressed, the dim light of dawn slicing through the blinds like judgment, casting long bars across the floor, as if I was still in that damn kennel. The house was too still. Even the rain had given up, the kind of quiet that made your ears ache for noise. I sat up slowly, my body sore from a night spent tossing between memories and dread. The envelope hadn't moved. Neither had I. What if I don't want what's inside? I whispered to the empty room. What if it wasn't an inheritance but a chain? A final shackle from a man who had bound us our whole lives with rules, shame, and unspoken threats. I stood and walked over to the fireplace. The cold ashes still held the scent of last winter's fire. I crouched down, envelope in hand. One flick of a match, and I could end it. Wipe the slate. Pretend none of this mattered. Silence would be easier, I muttered. It always has been. My thumb hovered over the matchbox when I heard the knock. Not soft, not polite. That sharp, impatient rhythm that only ever belonged to one person. Corbin. He didn't wait for an answer. The front door creaked open, and there he was, uninvited, as always, dressed in a tailored suit too sharp for a morning visit. He walked in like the house already belonged to him. "Morning," he said flatly. His eyes went straight to the envelope in my hand. "So, baby brother, looks like Dad finally gave you something." I didn't respond. Corbin smirked. "Don't get too comfortable. Whatever he left you, it's not real. You were just another one of his games." He stepped closer, examining the room like a realtor appraising a property. "You know, when I saw you at the podium, I actually laughed. I told Nissa, look at him, playing the humble son. You had everyone fooled for a second." I held the envelope tighter. He leaned in. "But we both know what you are. You didn't earn this. You got it because you were pitiful enough to tell a bedtime story over his coffin." His voice lowered, colder now. "You were his experiment, Laz, not his heir." I felt my stomach twist, not from his words, but from the part of me that believed them. For years, Corbin had been the golden child, the one who knew how to nod at the right moments, lie with a smile, twist the truth into something palatable for our father. I was the odd one, too quiet, too slow to please. My mind pulled me backward, 16 years old, standing in the den. I had finally found the nerve to call Elias out, told him I was tired of playing perfect, that I wouldn't lie anymore. He slapped me so hard my lips split, and as I stumbled back I saw Corbin on the stairs, laughing. "You'll never matter," he'd said. Those words had lived inside me ever since. Back in the present, I looked up at him. He had that same look, sure of himself, smug, already calculating the next step. "This house won't be yours for long," he said as he turned to leave. "Enjoy your little moment." He didn't slam the door. He didn't need to. I stood there, my pulse in my ears, the envelope crushed in my fist. Was he right? Was this just another trick? Another layer of Elias's manipulation? I sat back down, the match forgotten. I stared at the envelope again. My name stared back. Maybe silence is what he expected. Maybe that was the final test. I slid my finger under the flap and tore it open. What I saw made me gasp. Loud, involuntary. Inside was not just a will, it was a confession. I didn't move right away. Just sat there, my fingertips trembling as I pulled the papers from the envelope, one by one. The first was crisp, thick, his monogram at the top like a final signature of control. And then the handwriting, his handwriting, sharp, angular strokes, each word penned as if carved instead of written. I could hear his voice in my head even before reading the first line. To my youngest son, the one I broke the most. If you're reading this, you survived what the others could not. I stared at that sentence for a long time. My pulse had slowed to a crawl, the weight of the words anchoring me in place. Broken. Survived. Like this was a war, and I'd somehow stumbled out alive while the rest of them bled quietly into the floorboards. The rest of the letter unspooled like poison, slow and deliberate. He admitted it outright. Every punishment, every humiliation, every calculated silence. I tested you, he wrote. Because you were the only one who still looked me in the eye afterward. The others, they learned to please. You refused to kneel. I felt the blood drain from my face. I gave you nothing in life. Now I give you everything in death. Let's see if you choke on it. It wasn't an apology. It was a final blow disguised as a gift. The will named me primary heir, not Corbin, not Nissa, not even mother. Me, the one he humiliated the most. I dropped the papers onto the table and gripped the edge with both hands. My arms were shaking. Even now, he finds a way to chain me. I was still catching my breath when the front door burst open again, slamming against the wall like a gunshot. You've got to be kidding me, Corbin barked, already halfway into the living room. I didn't have the strength to argue. He marched straight to the coffee table, his eyes catching the signature on the will. So it's true, he hissed. You actually got it. The house, the accounts, everything. I didn't answer. The words wouldn't come. You don't deserve a dime, he spat. He hated you. Always did. Then explain this, I said hoarsely, tapping the letter with my finger. Corbin laughed, bitter and dry. That's not love, Laz. That's him still pulling your strings from the grave. You think this is a reward? It's another test. His voice was rising now, pacing like a man on the edge. He knew you'd cling to anything. That's why he gave it to you. Because you were the easiest to break. I stood. Slowly. Something inside me, the part that had always curled up in silence, refused to stay down. If you try to take this from me, I said, you'll regret it. Corbin stopped pacing. Threats don't suit you, he said. You've always been the weak one. That's why he chose you. Because you'd never fight back. He stepped closer, close enough for me to see the tight fury in his eyes. You think this changes anything? I've spent years cleaning up his messes. You were never in the game. Then he slammed his fist on the table, the will and letter scattered to the floor. But this time, I didn't flinch. He noticed, and that scared him more than I think he expected. He pulled back, his tone colder now. If you think Dad's games are over, he said, you're wrong. He taught me everything, too. With that, he turned and left, the door slamming shut behind him. I stood alone, breathing hard, chest tight. The papers lay across the floor, some folded, some crumpled, his words staring up at me from the carpet like claws. I bent down slowly, picked up the letter again, and read the last line out loud. Let's see if you choke on it. But this time I didn't feel broken. This time I saw the line not as a curse, but as a challenge. The morning sun had shifted by the time I stepped out of the house. It wasn't warm, it was sharp, like a blade pressed gently against skin. As I stood outside the downtown law office, watching my reflection in the glass doors, I whispered to myself, today, I don't walk in as a son, I walk in as a man. The receptionist gave me a polite nod and led me down the hall. The room wasn't large, but it felt tight, like every word said inside would ricochet off the walls and return louder. A long table stood at the center, with folders already laid out, coffee cups untouched. The scent of cold paper and worn leather lingered. Corbin was already there. Of course he was. He leaned back in his chair like he owned it, eyes flicking to me with that familiar smirk he used to wear when Dad would scold me in front of him. The lawyer, Mr. Kingsley, gave a courteous nod. "Thank you for coming, Lazaro. Shall we begin?" I sat down without answering. Let him speak first. Kingsley cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. "There is one remaining clause we hadn't disclosed until now. Per your father's final directive, the designation of primary heir comes with a condition." Corbin chuckled under his breath. Kingsley continued, "Both you and your siblings must vote on whether you, Lazaro, are fit to manage the estate. A majority vote in your favor means the inheritance stands. A rejection transfers control to Corbin." My stomach nodded, but I didn't flinch. Corbin straightened, the room thickening with his confidence. "Finally," he said, "a little sanity." Nissa wasn't there, but I knew which way she'd lean. She'd never fight Corbin. Not openly, not anymore. And my mother? Silent, always. Kingsley opened a leather folder. "You'll each give your vote verbally after discussion." Corbin wasted no time. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice measured but laced with venom. "Let's be honest here. Laz was never meant for this. He's unstable, isolated. He's been out of the picture for years. You think Dad trusted that with the family legacy?" He turned to me, smiling like a shark. "He got the will because he played victim, because he cried at the podium." I stayed still, calm, my fingers resting on the table, nails barely touching the wood. "You've always been weak," Corbin said, "and weakness gets rewarded in a world full of guilt. But not here, not today." I thought of the kennel, the cold, the food left out of reach, the nights I curled up on that concrete floor while the others laughed from the kitchen, and still I said nothing. Kingsley looked at me. "Lazaro," I met his gaze. Then I turned to Corbin. "You think endurance is weakness," I said slowly. "You think silence is surrender. But Dad didn't punish me because I was soft. He punished me because I didn't break the way he wanted." I leaned forward, matching Corbin's posture. He tested all of us. But I was the only one who didn't become him. The room fell into an eerie quiet. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a smaller envelope, weathered, sealed in red wax. "This was in the box, the one Aldous gave me," I said. "It's addressed only to me and unopened." Corbin's eyes narrowed. I handed it to Kingsley. He examined the seal, nodded. "That's your father's mark. It's real." Corbin shifted in his chair. For the first time, I saw a crack in his posture. I didn't open the letter, not yet. I held it up instead, meeting his eyes. "Maybe Dad left me one last move," I said. "And I think it's the one you'll never recover from." The letter trembled in my hand, but not from fear, from anticipation. The room around me had frozen in that moment, the air too thick to breathe, every eye locked on the red wax seal like it held the verdict of a lifetime. I broke it, slowly, intentionally. The paper inside was thick, yellowed slightly with time. My father's handwriting leapt off the page, sharp, slanted strokes, unapologetically precise, just like the man himself. "To my youngest son, the one I broke the most." I stopped reading for a moment. Across the table, Corbin tilted forward, his knuckles white against the wood, trying to read my face before I read the letter aloud. He wouldn't find anything. I made sure of that. I continued. "You endured more than your siblings, because I gave you more. I chose you for the hardest path, not because I loved you less, but because I saw in you what I never had in myself, restraint." My hands clenched tighter. "Where Corbin mimicked me, you resisted. Where the others submitted, you endured. That is why you are the heir, not to my wealth, but to the mess I leave behind. I gave you nothing in life. Now I give you everything in death. Let's see if you choke on it." I folded the letter silently and placed it on the table. Corbin stood abruptly, chair screeching behind him. This is a setup. You expect us to believe that letter? That's a joke. Kingsley remained seated, but his brow furrowed. The handwriting matches previous verified samples. The wax seal was intact. The estate acknowledges it as authentic. Corbin turned red. No. No, he's lying. He probably wrote that himself. You really think he was Daddy's golden boy? Please. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folded envelope, slapping it on the table with a self-satisfied grunt. I have one too. Found it just this morning. From Dad. Real letter, real seal. Kingsley took it carefully, adjusting his glasses as he opened it. The silence cracked with tension as he read, then flipped the page over. He held it up to the light, then leaned forward, frowning deeper. This isn't right, Kingsley muttered. What? Corbin snapped. The ink's wrong. The signature doesn't match. And this seal, it's not from our notary stamp. It's something else entirely. I watched Corbin's expression shift from anger to panic. The tide had turned, and he felt it too. Kingsley continued, This is clearly a forgery. There were murmurs from the other relatives seated near the back. Whispered words passed like wind through dry leaves. Corbin stepped back, eyes darting, the confidence leaking out of him with every breath. I leaned forward, calm but sharp. You tried to beat me with lies, just like Dad tried to break me with silence. Corbin's mouth twitched. You think this proves anything? You think sitting there with a letter makes you a leader? I didn't answer immediately. I took my father's original letter, laid it back on the center of the table, smoothed its edges. No, I said, but surviving him did. That shut him up. For a beat, no one moved, no one breathed. And then Corbin slammed the table so hard the water glasses jumped. This isn't over, he growled. You think you've won because of some paper? I stood slowly. This was never about paper. This was about who he couldn't break and who he turned into a mirror. I looked around the room. The same people who once called me fragile now stared like they were seeing me for the first time. I turned back to my brother. This was never about who inherited. It was about who finally broke free. Corbin's fist curled. He shook with rage. You think this is over? His voice cracked, low and feral. I'll burn everything before I let you win. He stormed out before anyone could stop him. The door slammed behind him like a gunshot. And all I could hear was my father's voice echoing in my memory. Let's see if you choke on it. I wasn't choking, not anymore. Corbin's threat wasn't empty, and what happened next nearly destroyed us all. It started quiet, the kind of quiet that clings to your skin in the mornings after a storm, when the sky is too clean, too bright, and the world feels like it's pretending nothing happened. I sat alone in my living room, coffee gone cold beside me, the sealed envelope from that day, long opened and filed away, but the words still burning in my head. The sunlight cut through the blinds in sharp lines, landing on the hardwood floor like a warning. Silence used to mean punishment. It used to be the kennel, cold, dark, no voice, no sound but my own breathing and the scrape of the chain against the concrete. Now, silence meant something else. Space, ownership, power. Still, part of me waited for the next blow. I didn't have to wait long. 3 days after the hearing, Kingsley called. Corbin's started moving assets, he said without preamble. Tried selling the Sugarland property under a fake authorization. We're filing an injunction now, but he's not being subtle. I should have been angry. Furious even, but all I felt was this deep cavernous ache, tired, ancient, heavy. He's trying to burn the house down from the outside, I said quietly. Kingsley exhaled through the phone. He's not just burning the house, he's pouring gasoline on the family name. That afternoon, I drove out to the estate. The gates were half open, the gravel path littered with broken branches and trash like no one had touched it in weeks. The old magnolia tree out front was gone, cut down, stump raw and jagged. It was my mother's favorite. Inside the house, it was worse. Furniture missing. Cabinets open. A portrait of my grandfather shattered on the floor, its frame stomped through. I knew Corbin did this. I didn't need proof. I could feel his hands in every wound. Later that evening, Kingsley emailed to confirm. Illegal sale attempted, charges pending, court siding with me. Legally, I was whole. Emotionally, not yet. That night, back at my place, I opened a box I hadn't touched in years. One of the few I hadn't gone through after the funeral. Inside, buried beneath old letters and school photos, was the collar. Leather, cracked and stiff, still faintly smelled of rust and wet concrete. I held it in my hands for a long time. That collar was more than just an object. It was a memory of silence, of being locked away, forgotten. It was my father's version of love, hard, bitter, and hidden inside punishment. I walked to the fireplace. The flames were low. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I tossed the collar in. It curled in the heat, twisted like it was alive, then crumbled to black. No more symbols, no more tests. In the following days, some relatives called. Quiet apologies. Awkward phone calls. A few even stopped by, leaving casseroles and just checking in notes. I accepted them all with calm neutrality. I didn't need their guilt, but I wasn't going to carry resentment either. Others never reached out. They didn't need to. I wasn't chasing validation anymore. What I did do, though, what mattered more than anything, was set the boundary. I will not chain anyone as I was chained, I told Kingsley during our last meeting. I meant it. That weekend, I visited the cemetery. The grass had grown longer around the grave, unkempt. The headstone stood clean, but plain. Elias Moreno, father, leader. I stood there for a while, not in anger, not even sadness, just presence. I know what you were trying to do, I said aloud. You thought if you broke me enough, I'd rise stronger. Maybe you were right. I placed a small stone at the base. Not flowers, not forgiveness, just something grounded. You broke me to see if I'd stand, I continued. Well, I stood, and I'll never bow again. I turned and walked back to the car, the late afternoon sun pressing warm against my back. And as I walked away from that grave, I realized the test was never his, it was mine. And I had finally passed.